Once again, thank you everyone for coming here. And love San Jose, live in San Jose, and it's sometimes difficult to work in such a beautiful place. But that's what we try to do. So I'm a data geek for longer than some of you have been in this earth, and data is beautiful. I just love it. I get excited by it. I'll stop there. Don't tweet. My wife shouldn't see who else I love so much. But the fascinating thing about it is that for first 25, 27 years of my life, I built technology and other people brought data to it. Last 3 years, I have been reading, looking at data. And we are seeing there's such a phenomenal power in data. And so it is so exciting for me to actually set this panel up. We'll try to make this panel a bit technical, because in the end, if things don't work, then the promise of that thing is kind of falls by the wayside. So we have assembled a set of folks, but in general, there's nothing more exciting for me after working for Chet and loving my wife is actually looking at data all the time. In some order. Okay, let's first begin with Vijay. Where's Vijay? Come on, Vijay.
All right.
So Vijay represents for us on this panel. What we have tried to do is bring together a diversity of views, people who are actually putting the data out and are interested in the transparency and efficiency that come with it. And Vijay represents that particular perspective. Peter? Peter here has been building a set of capabilities so that businesses can actually navigate through the data that the cities and governments are putting out. So Peter in some way represents the consumption side of the data that we are talking about. Abhi? Abhi helps us connect, has been helping us with Koht Academy and everything else, connect the developers with the data and with the needs for all of this. Because in the end, if people don't build on it, then it is put out and not used. So Abhi represents kind of the conduit between the data and applications and others. And you man, come on up. You represents all the beautiful applications that can be built on the data that exists out there. So we have tried to represent a diversity of views here, and I'll ask a few questions, and hopefully they'll ask each other and they'll argue. And
really good at arguing.
Don't just nod their heads and say yeah, makes perfect sense. Even though we do know that Vijay controls a lot of budget and everything else, so you might be differential.
He's right about everything.
You may be differential, but maybe you will argue. So I'll just open it up with a softball question, and people please introduce yourself, and we'll go in the order of Vijay, Abhi, Peter, and Yo. Just tell us what excites you about open data, and what are some of the best examples that you've seen out there. And I'll just let everybody briefly introduce themselves and answer that question.
Perfect. Hi, I'm Vijay Sammeta still. I'm still the Chief Information Officer. I'm assuming I haven't screwed up in front of my boss in seconds. So,
And my boss has left, right? So as long as you don't tweet about it, I'm absolutely safe.
So in terms of what excites me about open data, and I think, believe it or not, I'm not sure that all government data is super interesting, but I will say that as we begin or continue our own journey on open data, I temper what I do as the Chief Information Officer in this organization with the fact that I live in San Jose. And when I talk to my neighbors, it's about what's happening, at their house, on their street, in their neighborhood, and then kind of at the macro level to our council, our city manager, and the professional administrative staff of, what's going on throughout the entire community. And I think that's an incredibly powerful message. Beyond kind of, I'm sure we can all violently agree that, transparency is great, and kind of moving beyond that, the opportunity to engage residents and businesses in what services we provide them. And then the second piece I would add, since I'm going to take way longer than I probably should, is I think this is the beginning of a revitalization in new economies that maybe we've shed in the past, various types of industries, but I think we're creating a whole new industry. And it's difficult to say what the exact outcome is, because much like Silicon Valley and startups and coding, it's an iterative process, and I don't think you begin with the end in mind. You just begin with the next step in mind.
Go ahead, Abhi.
Hi, I'm Abhi Nemani. Until recently, I was the co-director of Code for America, which is a national nonprofit that works with cities on civic innovation. It started with a fellowship program, which runs about with 10 cities a year, taking on a hard problem like economic development and building technology to show what's possible. One thing that I did was help build some of the new programs to help kind of scale that model. And one of the reasons I think that I was happy to be part of this conversation is we built a startup accelerator. So this is to help new companies like OpenCounter, and Peter will tell you about that in a second, get off the ground and then get to scale. Because we think it really matters, to Vijay's point, to build an industry, right? And we're seeing that industry emerge and thrive. And that's one of the things that excites me. And currently I'm working with GovDelivery, which is a civic tech company that works with over 1,000 clients and helps them connect with over 75 million citizens. And one thing that we're working on is thinking, how can you use that platform to really enable more sustainable innovation in this space? But what I think I'm most excited about is that open data is moving beyond transparency. For a while, we were thinking about open data and openness in government, about accountability, about transparency. And these are vitally important things, right? Very important for us to keep those in mind. But also we have to keep in mind how we're making citizens' lives better, right? So in Boston, they're using open data to help kids get to school on time. In San Mateo, just up the road a little bit, they're using open data to help people find social services, right? These are examples of open data moving beyond transparency. And I think those are just the start, right? I think there's a lot more to happen there. And as long as the conversation stays focused on that, right? How are we deriving value for citizens? I think it's going to be really exciting what lies ahead.
Abhi decided to have a cup of coffee to jazz up his
I get excited about data too, just not as excited as you do.
Yeah, please be excited about different data than I am. We can't both be after the same data. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Koht. I'm the co-founder of OpenCounter, and before that I worked for the Economic Development Department for the City of Santa Cruz. Working with Code for America, we built a platform that actually takes a lot of city-published data that typically you wouldn't consider open data, like the municipal code, the fee schedule, the zoning ordinance, and makes it queryable so that people who are trying to start businesses or get projects off the ground get a customized walkthrough and can actually apply for permits online. I mean, we can do things like take the standard turnaround time for a zoning inquiry from 10 business days to 2 seconds. And that's done largely through the publishing of open data, and it's kind of amazing. We did a survey in California of about 540 agencies, and we found 350 of them published their shapefiles just online. You can go and grab them, and we found that over 400 of those agencies were actually publishing their municipal codes in HTML formats with good metadata around it. So we can build tools that can scale across the state really, really quickly. But when I also think about open data, I think about utility in my everyday life. And I drove up from Santa Cruz today, there's a horrible wreck on the way, and when I asked Google how to get to San Jose, it told me I can go SoCal San Jose Road or I can go up Highway 9, and it knew to the minute how long it was going to take to get here. Similarly, when I'm not working, I like to surf a lot, and I get text messages based on NOAA's data from the middle of the ocean telling me when and how good it's going to be at my favorite breaks. And it's just amazing to live in the future. And finally, I love NASA photography. Astronomy pick of the day is the best thing in the world, and that's open data as well.
Are you allowed to text and surf?
No, you can't text me.
Yes.
I felt it away.
So I am Yoshida. I'm the founder of Appallicious. We're one of the first private civic startups to come out of the open data movement. We started around the same time as Code for America, but on the private side, and we even had some very great conversations going back as to what that meant. We were trying to figure out if we should go the nonprofit, open source, everything else. We couldn't sustain ourselves that way. So we created Appallicious with the mindset that we were going to create platforms to support communities and government and better empower and enable citizens, transparency, and as we progress through our product cycles, we've gone from a platform for cities to create their own apps and run their own apps like San Francisco Rec and Park, to a comprehensive overview, kind of like what Walk Score should have been, Neighborhood Score, which is the working with the Department of Public Health, Code for America on their House Fact Standard, and another of other government agencies. We've compiled over 120 data sets to create the first comprehensive overview of a neighborhood, the health of a neighborhood, using, I think there's something like 500 different data sets comprehensively over government. It was launched in San Francisco, and we're looking now to replicate that city by city in the state of California. With that, we need open data for that. So the Prop 42 that was passed will help us access it a lot more. And out of that, we've created other products working with the White House, FEMA, working on a disaster dashboard, which is what really excites me, is when you can start moving your products from transparency, great little tools, into how can we help prepare people, how can we help save lives, how can we really make an impact and change at a federal, state, and local level, and through that using open data to engage the individual citizen. So with that, I'm very passionate about data, and we can't exist without it.
We'll see who is more. Great. Fantastic. Thank you, folks. So just wanted to, in the end, governments will put data out, but beyond putting it out, clearly as every one of our panelists has pointed out, it is really how it is used as opposed to how it is put out. That's what makes a difference. And there is one set of characters that sit between the putting out and its ultimate value, and those are the developers. People who are going to actually take that data, the messy data that exists, the data that's accessible only in web pages, and you got to scrape it, and the website is down and everything else. That itself is probably a challenge for some developers, but also from kind of the developers here, especially in the Valley, running after commercial money. How would you motivate the developers and say that no, this is technically challenging and rewarding, and that people should actually look at and use and leverage this open data? Abhi?
So the first thing I would do is just give them some numbers, and this is what always works. I was giving a talk in Kansas City once, and this guy was actually building software for procurement for enterprise, not for government. I told him what I did, like talked about government technology, and he's like, "That's crazy! I would never get in that game."
Really?
Yeah.
That's crazy. I should never get in that.
Some people are just
Unless you already are, then don't get out.
But then I gave him some numbers. So I think Brian was mentioning how much money spent on government technology every year. It's $140 billion, right? State, federal, and local. But let's put that in perspective. So video games, right? So Nintendos and Sega's. Is Sega still around? I don't think.
You're too young to
That's a $10 billion market, right? iOS apps, so all the phones that people are building for their iPhones, etc. The iOS app market is $2 billion. So government is orders of magnitude bigger, right? And I think if you're going to a developer, if you're going to somebody who's just graduating from college, thinking about a new startup they want to build, if you tell them that this is a market that's big, this is an industry, and it's one that matters, I think that resonates, and I think that's why we're seeing so many people join Code for San Jose, we're seeing so many companies apply for the Code for America Accelerator, and we're seeing all the people up here.
Great. You have been building apps, and your developers have been building apps and websites and others. Do they get motivated by the technical challenges, or do they get frustrated by the technical challenges, or do they get motivated
Stop
by...
pointing at me.
Do they get motivated by technical challenges? Do they get frustrated by... Sorry, go ahead.
There is, I mean, obviously, when you go into a city that hasn't been working in the space, there's a lot of frustration. But, you know, it's part of the process, right? You go in and you discover new things, and while we were working on several projects, and I failed to mention, Neighborhood Score was a joint venture with a group of us, including Department of Public Health. We started discovering all sorts of other opportunities and data sets that they didn't know they were available that could be used for all sorts of other applications. So we get excited as we're kind of going through this kind of discovery process. Yes, there is a lot of misunderstandings or miscategorizations and all of this, but as you go through, even with their own department, they started innovating and iterating off their own data, and we were able to create, and we're creating new products out of them. One of them being Code Enforcement Assessment Dashboard, which is, you know, a product that came out of a tragedy that we discovered. My neighbor fell through the stairs and died a couple years ago, and she was the third person to fall through the stairs. And there was 3 different departments that came out, and the databases never talked to each other, so 3 different departments didn't know that these violations were going on. So we were able to, while exploring Neighborhood Score, discover that there was just data sets. The House Fact standards had these data sets, and we were able to say, hey, why don't we just create an overlay dashboard that all the departments, when they come out to the field, are able to discover that there was violations in each of them. So our team gets really excited about being able to do kind of that crossover and create something that can be of substance and really help. And within the tech community, we get slammed a lot for, you know, not giving back, but within this community specifically, these people really want to engage and really help people in some capacity, and that's why they're getting involved, because us smaller startups don't have the big payrolls, and we have to attract them through something else, and that's what we've been able to do, is say, hey, you're actually going to make a difference and change in this world.
Great, thank you. Peter?
I think following on what Yo just said, it's good to work on problems that matter. And there's plenty of photo sharing apps. They're great. I'm sure my wife has all of them on her phone. You know, there are plenty of companies in the Bay Area that make great consumer-focusing apps. But working in this space, which is, again, a huge space with a potential for leapfrogging technology. So I was talking to Brian earlier, and I mentioned when I was 18, I left the suburbs of San Mateo and went to Nigeria. And the thing about the developing world is they never did copper. They just went straight to mobile phones. And actually, the developing world is further ahead on mobile payments than we are here in the United States. And we have the same possibility for going into government as well. The sort of classic big iron systems are coming up for renewal, and there are huge opportunity spaces to get in. And did I ever think I was going to build an API to zoning ordinances? No, but it turns out it's a really interesting thing to work on. And also, I was listening to 99% Invisible this morning. There were 65 deaths in commercial buildings in 2012. Building codes are important. Like, the rules that cities have are important. And I just am a huge believer in the power of cities, and as we get more urbanized, that there'll be more and more opportunities to work on problems with huge data sets and really impact a lot of people's lives.
Great. Vijay, for not creating any problems for us.
Sure, no problem.
For putting out the cleanest, best data sets that are easily actionable. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So yes, thank you. Okay, so a question for you.
Sure.
One of the things that I discovered was that data has a role of internal transparency, not just transparency for, in our case, for the citizens and all that. So for example, here at Apigee, right, we are not big enough to be a large company, but yet we have functions like marketing and sales and support and build and everything else. And when customer problems happen, right, we are always trying to figure out what's the root cause and everything else. And the power of actually learning from the same ground truths across the board is absolutely fantastic. So have you all thought about open data not just from making the lives of citizens better, but actually making your internal operations more transparent and others? And do people feel that the interfaces for one division internally should not be any different than the interfaces for the external citizenry to actually access that?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, I think that's back to the fundamentals of transparency. I think as we look at just this past budget process for us. We've added 3 key positions to the city that really talk to a firm commitment around transparency, performance, data analytics. So we've added a mid-level manager to focus on being a open data architect to help these types of economies grow. Internally, we have 2 data analysts that reside in our manager's office that are there to look at performance internally. So as I think about having to engage my internal stakeholders, giving them a different way to access data across 20 some odd different departments is probably what the frustration you guys feel as you hit every single city, every single department within a city, every access database, whatever exists out there in the universe, that these little pockets of data exist. And to rewrite Apigee's business plan on the fly here,
Yes.
I think if you can develop an API that
how much budget do you have for that? Okay. No.
Where's Chet? Get him back in the room.
No, I'll take care of that. No.
So, I mean, the concept of where data is stored, I mean, government is coming everything from new systems to data being stored in baby boomers who are about to retire's heads. So if there's an API for that, I mean, I think we'll buy it right now. Coffee, right? So from a succession planning perspective, these systems have to evolve. Just from succession planning for our own success, so we don't, just simply bother recreating the wheel constantly, but also help support, private sector and internal efficiencies.
Great. Okay, I have a mission. How much time do we have?
How much more time do you want?
No. 2.5 hours.
Another panel.
5 minutes. Okay. So why don't we, at this point in time, open it up to 1 or 2 questions? Who wants to ask the question of this esteemed panel? Otherwise,
We answered everything?
I've got a long list. Really? I'm afraid of saying, Mohan, please ask a question, because then he will. So that's why I'm not going to. Okay. Once, twice. So one more technical question. So we always, even in the commercial world, we face the problem that there are producers of the data, and then there are consumers of the data. Sometimes consumers really understand what data elements they need. So typically what I've found in dealing with open data is that it is up to the consumers to then go and make sense of it, or cleanse it, or standardize it, or mix and match it. That makes it technically challenging and all that. But then that job gets repeated with every consumer. So do we feel that in this world of open data, that the job of keeping the data current and consistent and all that is the job of data producers? Or is the responsibility also, or the excitement also, sitting with the consumers? Peter, what's your view?
So I'm going to go deep down the urban planning rat hole right now. We provide an interface to multiple departments that are thinking about small business entitlements in different manners. So oftentimes the use codes that you find in the zoning ordinance don't match up with how Public Works does development impact fees, because they think in terms of transportation engineering numbers. And then that's not how finance thinks about it, because they have to report it to the IRS and the NACE code system. So a restaurant can be 3 different things, but to the consumer it's just a restaurant. So we provide an interface to the consumer where they're like, I'm getting a restaurant permit. And then we do all the translation on the back end, so that when Public Works sees it, it's like, oh, ITE code 740. And the finance system sees it as the 7-digit NACE code for food service and eatery, non-alcohol serving, open on Tuesdays. So a lot of what we say that OpenCounter does is we trick people into eating their vegetables, and you can do that through good interface and good metadata programming on the back end.
Abhi, or you, or Vijay?
I would actually just argue that we should start blurring the lines between those distinctions,
Yes.
right? The idea of data consumers and data providers, as the question you just asked earlier about
Yes, exactly.
can you use data internally for
Yes.
efficiencies and transparency shows that that's the case, right? The government is both the producer and the consumer of that data. And in the same way, Peter and OpenCounter is using government data, but also providing open data themselves, right? What's important, I think, is to have an ongoing conversation with all the stakeholders around an open data community, and that means government, private sector, nonprofit, foundations, and all the people who are in this room, right? Have an ongoing conversation about what are the challenges we have and what are the opportunities that we can work on together. Great. Thank you.
You said it.
Default.
Vijay.
So, I think it's an
Good job,
ecosystem,
Abhi.
right? I mean, I think both, in the way we say that open data is important, either private sector or internally, I think it's the same. And I think it's an ecosystem that ultimately the private sector has to not only survive but flourish, because I don't know where's Michelle? Michelle's around here somewhere. If I put on her economic development hat and we say, hey, we've got this new company that's going to be moving to town, they're going to start using our data, that's right in her wheelhouse from an economic development perspective. So the private sector flourishing on public sector data is good for public sector. And I think there's lots of opportunities along that. So it is an ecosystem, and I think that I don't really make a distinction between whether it's internal or external from that perspective.
And I think we should we should start with standard. I mean, we really need to look at standardization across the board. We're talking about public side, private side, where all there's no standards for anything. We have a standard measuring for science class, right? Why isn't there standards for where the data is stored, how it's being stored, and how it's being distributed? And it's a big thing, and it's a big scary thing for government and for everyone else. But until we get those in place, there's going to be a lot of difficulty communicating on both sides, and it's a responsibility of all of us to come together and try to solve those problems.
Great, we'll have a conversation on standards offline. Okay, once again, big thanks to our really esteemed panelists. Really appreciate it.